In 1826, a fur trapper named Hugh Glass crawled 200 miles across the Dakota Plains with a shattered leg and a back ripped open by a grizzly bear. He survived on raw buffalo liver, wild berries, and rattlesnake meat he killed with a rock. Doctors today would call that a recipe for parasitic infection. But Glass lived to be 60 years old. Here's the twist. Modern nutritionists now say the mountain men's diet, the one we once dismissed as savage and desperate, may have been one of the most nutrient-dense ways humans have ever eaten. Number 14 on this list was so effective at preventing scurvy that the U.S. Army tried to replicate it and failed. Number 3 involves a preservation method that food scientists at Cornell recently tested and found creates antimicrobial compounds no modern refrigerator can match. These 25 foods kept men alive through Rocky Mountain winters, where temperatures dropped to 40 below, through months-long trapping expeditions with no resupply, and across deserts where water was a rumor. The men who ate them were not savages, they were survival engineers operating in the most hostile environment on the continent. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because what you are about to learn might change how you think about food, survival, and what it actually takes to stay alive when civilization is 1,000 miles behind you. Let us count down the 25 rugged frontier foods mountain men actually ate to stay alive. Number 25, hardtack. That dense, pale cracker, baked from flour, water, and nothing else, was the backbone of every trapper's possibles bag. Bakers in St. Louis turned out thousands of these 3-inch squares before each trading season, baking them twice to drive out every drop of moisture. The result was a cracker so hard you could chip a tooth on it, but one that would last for years without spoiling. Mountain men carried hardtack wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of their packs, knowing it might be the only thing between them and starvation when game disappeared in deep winter. A single piece weighed barely an ounce, but delivered around 75 calories of pure starch energy. The trick was soaking it in coffee, broth, or creek water until it softened enough to chew. Some men crumbled it into rendered fat to make a crude porridge. Hardtack was never loved, but it was always there. And in the mountains, reliability meant more than flavor. When everything else ran out, that plain square of twice-baked flour kept men walking. Number 24, pemmican. If there was one food that defined the mountain man's existence, it was pemmican. Native peoples had been making it for centuries before the first trapper crossed the Missouri. Women of the Plains tribes dried buffalo meat in thin strips under the summer sun, then pounded it into shreds with stone tools. They mixed the powdered meat with melted tallow at roughly 1:1, sometimes folding in dried choke cherries or service berries. The result was a dense, greasy cake that packed around 135 calories per ounce and contained complete protein, saturated fat, and enough vitamins to prevent deficiency diseases for months. A single buffalo could yield 40 to 50 pounds of pemmican. Packed into rawhide parfleche bags, it kept for years without refrigeration. Trappers bought it at Rendezvous for about $2 a pound in the 1830s, a steep price when beaver pelts fetched $6 each. But the investment was survival itself. A man could carry a month's worth of calories in a saddlebag. No cooking required, no fire to attract hostile attention. Just cut a chunk, chew, and keep moving. The fur trade itself could not have existed without pemmican. It was the fuel that powered an industry. Number 23, jerked venison. Every mountain man knew how to jerk meat. Deer, elk, or buffalo was sliced thin against the grain, sometimes rubbed with salt, if any could be had, and hung over a low, smoky fire built from green willow branches. The smoke kept flies away, while the heat dried the meat over 8 to 12 hours. A pound of fresh venison shrank to roughly 4 ounces of jerky, concentrating the protein and fat. Trappers stuffed it into every available pocket. The taste was smoky, salty, and intensely meaty. Not pleasant by modern standards, but deeply satisfying after 10 hours of wading through frozen streams to check beaver traps. Some men added wild sage or juniper berries during the smoking process, creating regional flavors that varied from the Yellowstone country to the Sangre de Cristos. The skill was knowing when to pull the meat off the rack. Too early, and it spoiled within days. Too late, and it turned to powder in your hands. Number 22, roasted buffalo hump. At the annual rendezvous, when thousands of trappers and traders gathered in the Green River Valley or Pierre's Hole, the centerpiece of every feast was the roasted hump of a buffalo cow. The hump ribs, those tall vertebrae between the shoulders padded with thick marbled fat, were considered the finest cut of meat on the frontier. Trappers who had spent months eating nothing but lean rabbit and creek water would weep at the sight of a hump roast turning over an open fire. The fat rendered slowly into the meat, while the outside charred and crisped. Jim Bridger himself reportedly said he would trade a good horse for a proper hump roast after a long winter. The flavor was rich, beefy, and deeply satisfying in a way that modern grain-fed cattle cannot replicate. A single hump could feed 8 men and provide enough fat to keep their bodies burning calories through cold mountain nights. The bones were cracked afterward for marrow, and nothing was left behind. Number 21, bone marrow. When a mountain man cracked open a buffalo femur with the back of his hatchet and scooped out the warm, buttery marrow inside, he was eating what modern nutritionists now call a superfood. Bone marrow is roughly 80% fat, loaded with vitamins A, D, and K, and contains compounds that support immune function. Trappers did not know any of this. They just knew that marrow was the richest, most satisfying thing they could eat, and that craving it was their body's way of saying it needed fuel. In deep winter, when game was scarce and every calorie counted, men boiled cracked bones for hours to extract every trace of fat and gelatin. The resulting broth was thick, greasy, and life-sustaining. Some trappers called marrow prairie butter and spread it on hardtack like you would spread jam on toast. Others drank the warm liquid fat straight from the bone, feeling the calories hit their bloodstream almost immediately. Bone marrow was the emergency fund of the frontier diet. When everything else failed, a pile of cracked bones could keep a man alive. First pattern break. The beaver tail was considered the single greatest delicacy of the Rocky Mountain fur trade. Not the pelt, the tail. That flat, scaly appendage was almost pure fat. Trappers roasted beaver tails directly in the coals of the campfire. The scaly skin blistered and peeled away to reveal a white, gelatinous meat that tasted, according to journals from the era, like the richest pork you have ever eaten. Catholic missionaries actually classified beaver as fish because of its aquatic lifestyle, which meant trappers could eat it during Lent without guilt. Here is what modern food science confirmed. Beaver tail fat is high in omega-3 fatty acids, the same compounds we pay premium prices for in fish oil capsules. The Hudson's Bay Company listed beaver tails as a separate trade item from pelts priced at a premium. We forgot this food existed. The trappers who ate it thrived. Number 19, buffalo tongue. Mountain men prized buffalo tongue above every other cut, and for good reason. The muscle was dense, tender, and marbled with fat that melted during slow roasting over coals. A single tongue weighed between 3 and 5 pounds, and could feed two hungry men. The flavor was rich and beefy with a buttery texture that required no knife. You could tear it apart with your fingers. During the great buffalo hunts of the 1830s, commercial hunters sometimes took only the tongues and left entire carcasses rotting on the plains. Smoked and salted tongues were shipped downriver to St. Louis, where restaurants served them as a luxury item for $2 a plate. Trappers in the field ate them fresh, sometimes raw and still warm from the kill. The tongue was the first thing cut from any buffalo. If a man rode into camp with a tongue tied to his saddle, everyone knew the hunting had been good. Number 18, boudin. The French-Canadian voyageurs introduced this one. Boudin were buffalo intestines, cleaned just enough to remove the worst of the contents, then roasted whole over an open fire. The partially digested grass inside gave them a sharp, tangy flavor that trappers either loved or endured. The fat surrounding the intestines crisped as it cooked, and the whole thing was eaten like a sausage. Trappers at rendezvous reportedly raced to see who could eat the longest unbroken length. The practice revolted missionaries, but the men understood something their critics did not. Every organ contained nutrients that muscle meat alone could not provide. Boudin delivered B vitamins, iron, and probiotics from the fermented grass. Number 17, parched corn. Before a trapping party left the settlements, each man filled a leather pouch with parched corn. Dried kernels were heated in a skillet with bear grease until they swelled and darkened. A pound of parched corn fit in a coat pocket and delivered over 1,600 calories. Mixed with water, it swelled in the stomach and created fullness. Daniel Boone reportedly carried parched corn on every expedition. It did not spoil. It did not attract animals. It was quiet to eat, a real advantage when moving through contested territory. Number 16, wild onions and camas root. The mountains were not a meat-only diet, despite what Hollywood tells you. Every experienced trapper knew where to find wild onions, pulling the small bulbs from creek banks across the Rockies. Roasted in campfire ashes, they turned sweet and soft. Camas root was even more important. The bulb of a blue-flowered lily, camas was roasted in underground pits for up to 3 days, transforming into something that tasted remarkably like sweet potato. Lewis and Clark's journals record their men eating camas in large quantities, though the sudden fiber intake caused days of digestive misery for men unaccustomed to it. Number 15, rendered bear grease. Every autumn, when black bears and grizzlies fattened themselves on berries and salmon before hibernation, mountain men hunted them as much for their fat as for their meat. A large black bear could yield 8 to 10 gallons of rendered grease. Strained through cloth and stored in skin bags or tin containers, bear grease kept for months and served as the all-purpose fat of the frontier. Men fried meat in it, waterproofed their leather with it, greased their rifle patches with it, and rubbed it into their skin to ward off mosquitoes and windburn. Mixed with flour, it made crude biscuits. Spread on hardtack, it added desperately needed calories. The flavor was mild and slightly sweet when fresh, turning rancid only after months of poor storage. Bear grease was so valuable that the Hudson's Bay Company traded it alongside pelts, and some trappers considered a full container of rendered grease worth more than a good knife. Second pattern break. Now here is where things get uncomfortable. When starvation was real, mountain men ate their horses and their moccasins. Horse meat was not considered shameful on the frontier. It was insurance. If the snow came early, if the game vanished, that horse was the difference between living and dying. John C. Fremont's 1843 expedition survived an entire Sierra Nevada crossing on horse and mule meat. Kit Carson reportedly showed the men how to roast the liver first because it provided the fastest energy. When the horses were gone, men boiled rawhide strips from their equipment. The collagen broke down into a gelatinous broth that tricked the stomach into feeling full. Some men chewed the soles of their moccasins. Desperation was not weakness on the frontier. It was Tuesday. Number 13, dried berries. Service berries, choke cherries, huckleberries, and wild currants grew in abundance across the northern Rockies. Berries were dried on flat rocks in the summer sun, concentrating their sugars and vitamins. A pound of dried service berries packed enough vitamin C to prevent scurvy for weeks. Trappers who ate berries stayed healthy. Those who did not eat berries lost their teeth and bled from their gums. Choke cherries were pounded whole, pits and all, creating a paste with compounds modern research has linked to anti-inflammatory benefits. The mountain men were practicing nutritional medicine without knowing it. Number 12, trout and mountain whitefish. The rivers of the Rockies teemed with cutthroat trout and mountain whitefish in numbers modern anglers can barely imagine. Fresh trout roasted on a green willow stick over coals was one of the genuine pleasures of mountain life. Some men smoked their catch over alderwood, creating preserved fish that lasted weeks. In the Yellowstone country, trappers reported catching trout so plentiful that a single afternoon's fishing could feed a party of 10 for 2 days. Number 11, buffalo liver eaten raw. This was the food that horrified Eastern journalists and fascinated anthropologists. Within minutes of killing a buffalo, mountain men would cut open the belly, pull out the liver, and eat it raw and steaming on the spot. Sometimes they squeezed the gallbladder over it, using the bitter bile as a seasoning. The practice was learned directly from Plains Indian hunters who had done it for thousands of years. It sounds brutal, but the nutritional logic was ironclad. Raw liver is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on Earth, packed with iron, vitamin A, B vitamins, and copper. Cooking destroys a significant portion of these nutrients. The bile acted as a digestive aid, helping the body absorb fat-soluble vitamins more efficiently. Men who had been running on lean meat and hardtack for weeks described eating fresh liver as a feeling like medicine hitting the blood. Energy returned within minutes. The fog of malnutrition lifted. Modern survival experts confirm that raw organ meats can reverse nutritional deficiencies faster than any other whole food. The mountain men did not need a study. They felt it in their bones. Number 10, acorn mush. In the Sierra Nevada, mountain men learned acorn processing from the Miwok and Yokuts peoples. Acorns were shelled, ground into flour, and leached repeatedly with water to remove bitter tannins. The resulting paste was cooked into thick porridge or baked into dense cakes. Acorn flour is roughly 500 calories per cup, and it provides a rare balance of fat, carbohydrate, and protein that almost no other plant food matches. Trappers headed for the California fur trade quickly adopted acorn mush as a staple. Number 9, sagamite. This thick corn porridge traveled with French-Canadian voyageurs from the Great Lakes to the Rockies. Coarsely ground, dried corn was boiled in water with whatever fat or meat was available. A kettle of sagamite could feed a dozen men for pennies. The American Fur Company budgeted corn as its single largest food expense. Sagamite was gray, lumpy, and tasted mainly of whatever fat had been stirred in. But it was dependable, cheap, and calorie-dense. On the frontier, those three qualities mattered more than anything a chef could offer. Third, pattern break. Before canned goods, before refrigeration, the mountain men had one preservation technology that trumped everything: smoke. Not the gentle wisp, from a backyard grill, but a thick, acrid cloud from green cottonwood and sage that hung in a closed teepee for days. Meat hanging in this smoke chamber absorbed phenolic compounds that killed bacteria on contact. The creosote coated every fiber, creating a chemical barrier. Researchers at Cornell tested traditional Native American smoking methods and found that properly smoked meat resisted bacterial growth for months at ambient temperature, outperforming many commercial preservatives. The mountain men were applying a technology refined over thousands of years. We replaced it with sodium nitrate. They used a campfire and patience. Pine nut soup. In the Great Basin, pinon pines produced small, oily nuts that became a critical survival food. Ground into a paste and boiled with water, the nuts turned into a rich, creamy soup. Pine nuts are over 60% fat by weight. A single cup of pine nut soup delivered more calories than a steak. Jedediah Smith's party survived their brutal 1827 crossing of the Great Basin in part because they traded with Paiute bands for pine nuts. Number 6. Dried buffalo meat rehydrated in marrow broth. This was the everyday meal of the working trapper. Strips of smoke-dried buffalo were dropped into a pot of boiling water, enriched with cracked bone marrow, wild onions, and whatever herbs grew within reach of camp. After an hour of simmering, the meat softened into something approaching tenderness. The marrow enriched the broth with thick, glossy fat, and the result was a stew that delivered protein, fat, and minerals in one steaming bowl. Men ate it morning and evening, day after day, for months on end. The repetition would drive a modern person to madness, but for a man who had spent 12 hours wading through icy beaver streams, that bowl was everything. The broth alone was medicinal, rich in glycine and proline from dissolved collagen, compounds that support joint health and gut lining. Modern bone broth companies charge $12 a cup for what mountain men made every night over a campfire from ingredients that cost them nothing but effort. Number 5. Roasted cactus pads. In the deserts of the Southwest, mountain men who followed the old Spanish Trail or trapped along the Gila River learned to eat prickly pear cactus from Pueblo and Apache peoples. The broad, flat pads were held over a flame to burn off the spines, then sliced and roasted until tender. The taste was green and slightly tart, similar to green beans, with a mucilaginous texture that took getting used to. But the real value was the water content. Cactus pads are over 90% water, making them a hydration source as much as a food source in country where springs could be 50 miles apart. The fruit of the prickly pear, deep red and sweet when ripe, was eaten raw or dried for the trail. Trappers crossing the Mojave or the Sonoran Desert survived on cactus when nothing else grew, a lesson learned hard and remembered well. Number 4. ELK. Heart roasted on a stick. When a mountain man killed an elk, the heart was claimed before the hide was even pulled back. Speared on a sharpened green branch and held over a bed of glowing coals, the whole heart roasted for 20 to 30 minutes, the outside charring while the inside stayed tender and almost creamy with blood. Elk heart is pure muscle with almost no fat, dense with iron and CoQ10, a compound modern supplement companies extract and sell for $30 a bottle. The flavor was deep, mineral-rich, and intensely meaty, nothing like the bland chicken breast of a modern diet. Men sliced it thick and ate it with their fingers, the juices running down their wrists. In Crow and Blackfoot tradition, the heart was reserved for the hunter who made the kill, a mark of honor and skill. Mountain men who lived among these peoples adopted the practice and carried it with them across the divide. A roasted elk heart after a successful hunt was as close to celebration as the frontier allowed. Fourth pattern break. The secret survival food nobody talks about was tallow candles. When starvation hit and every scrap of food was gone, mountain men ate their own candles. Tallow candles were made from rendered beef or buffalo fat. The fat was digestible and calorie-dense. Journals from multiple expeditions mention men chewing candle stubs to quiet their stomachs during the worst stretches. Each candle delivered several hundred calories. This was not planned. It was the last line of defense against death. Number 2. Wazana. Wazana was pemmican's more refined cousin, prepared by Lakota and Dakota women with a care that elevated it from survival ration to something approaching cuisine. The base was the same: dried buffalo meat pounded fine and mixed with rendered fat. But Wazana incorporated dried wild plums, timpsula or prairie turnip, and sometimes maple sugar traded from eastern tribes. The mixture was packed into rawhide cases and could sustain a family through an entire winter. Mountain men who married into Lakota or Cheyenne families ate Wazana regularly and considered it far superior to the cruder pemmican available at trading posts. The balance of protein, fat, and carbohydrate was almost perfect for sustained physical labor. A handful in the morning could fuel a man through a full day of trapping. Modern endurance athletes have begun experimenting with Wazana-style foods, and the results are remarkable. Stable energy, no crashes, no digestive distress. The Lakota perfected performance nutrition 2 centuries before the first energy bar was wrapped in foil. Number 1. Dipuil, the rendered back fat of a prime buffalo cow. This was the single most prized food on the American frontier. Dipuil was the thick slab of pure white fat that ran along both sides of the spine of a buffalo cow in peak autumn condition. Carefully removed in whole sheets, it was rendered slowly over a low fire until it became clear golden oil, then cooled into a firm, snow-white block. The flavor was clean and rich, milder than beef tallow and smoother than lard. Trappers ate dipuil by the spoonful, spread it on everything, and judged the quality of a hunting season by how much they had stored. A buffalo cow in October could yield 20 to 30 pounds of back fat, representing thousands of calories of the purest, most bioavailable energy source on the plains. Journals from the fur trade era returned to dipuil again and again with an almost reverential tone. Men described eating it as a feeling of deep, complete satisfaction that no other food could match. In sub-zero temperatures, burning 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day just to stay warm, that block of rendered fat was the difference between endurance and collapse. Here is my challenge. Try one of these this week. Crack a beef marrow bone and roast it at 400 degrees. Make a batch of pemmican with dried meat, tallow, and dried berries. Jerk some venison over a smoky fire. Then come back and tell me if those mountain men were just desperate, or if they actually understood something about food and survival that we have completely forgotten. Share which one you want to try in the comments, because these were not just frontier foods, they were a survival system refined over thousands of years, built on knowledge that grocery stores and freezer aisles made us forget. The mountain men knew. Now you know too.